Damien Hines.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I commend and congratulate my right honourable friend, Member for Harlow, for securing this debate and for all the work that he and his committee do. He set out very effectively the extent and the differential impact that there's been on children over this past year and a little. And like him and other colleagues from across the House, I'd like to pay tribute to school leaders and teachers and staff in East Hampshire and throughout the country. I'm speaking in support of the main estimates and the subsequent announcements that there have been from the DFE, which we anticipate being reflected in the supplementary estimate. And also note that the government has said that these are not the final words on support for education catch-up or acceleration. Of course, that is not only about money. You can't, for example, just will the existence of many more tutors suitably qualified and of the quality we would expect. And when it comes to extra time, and there clearly is a role for extra time, that also requires careful application. One needs to recognise that there's not a common starting point. There are very, very different school days now between different schools in different places. And within the extra time, there is room, by the way, for academic catch-up. And I think the honourable gentleman who speaks for the opposition rather skillfully, in spite of his extensive intervention on my right honourable friend, still managed to avoid taking a position on that question. But it's clearly not only about academic catch-up, because so much of what has been missed is about enrichment, about character building, about personal development, just about the sheer joy of growing up and being with other children. And to address these challenges, we need a broad approach. I've talked in terms of a whole-of-society response. But from government, obviously, there are multiple strands that are required as well. And it needs to include an acceleration of the measures from the Children and Young People's Mental Health Green Paper, for example, a refreshed school sports and activity plan, and much more. It is about children at all stages and all phases, and I welcome the additional resourcing in the estimate for the early years, and also funding for the extra learning time in T-level as part of the upgrade of our technical and vocational education. My right honourable friend has long campaigned for a long-term plan for education, and I think this should be the moment. We talk a lot about building back better. This should be the moment, can be the moment, where we put that long-term plan in place, and particularly on funding. Now, school funding here, by international standards, is relatively high, and every year the OECD publish tables that show this. There are many different measures, and whichever one you pick, people will say you've picked the wrong one. But the point is that whichever of those measures you pick, this country is relatively high in its spend on education, state education at primary and secondary level. But there have been three issues with the way that we fund schools. The Department for Education has been dealing for some years now with historical disparities between different parts of the country, and that is a painful process in some ways to go through, but it does result in a fairer outcome. The second issue is about strains in the high needs block, especially since the reforms brought through by my honourable friend in 2014, the Children and Families Act, which extended, of course, rights to extra support. But the strains on high needs funding go wider and are longer. Steps have been taken, but we need to do more, and that includes in capital terms for state special school places, but also early intervention support within mainstream settings, and including in the early years, and a complete reappraisal of the way that the financial transfers and some of the potential effective disincentives work within the system. And I think also there's a case for re-looking at the way that those people who are employed, assistants who are employed to specifically to look after and to assist children with special education needs, about how they are employed. So it is easier to move between schools and so on as children themselves move on. And the third problem has been that the formula itself sometimes makes long-term planning for schools harder and is therefore less efficient. It doesn't reflect fully year-to-year swings in pupil numbers and the fact that although some costs are fully variable with the number of pupils in school, some are fixed at different levels. They're fixed at the level of individual classes or at the level of the school. And the approach is not sufficiently long-term to enable people, sometimes in quite small, a school is a relatively small financial unit for the public sector, to enable them to be able to plan properly. It would be good to have rolling 3-year or 5-year budgets. And I know obviously the Treasury dislikes that, and the way historically, whoever has been in government, the way we have done this has been through the spending review periods. But I think there is a good case to relook at that. As we come out of this pandemic, of course, children must be at the very, very top of our list of priorities. But this is also an opportunity to help us to put many things that we do in the way that we do them on a surer, longer-term footing.